So good evening, everyone. And I'm really happy to have this chance to speak tonight to all of you on what is one of my favorite topics, kindness and compassion. And so as Laura said, I will be speaking for about an hour. We might have the time to do a little bit of meditation at the end. And then there should be time for questions and answers that you can ask about whatever I've talked about, or if you want to know something about who we are, what we do, and so on. I'll be happy to answer your questions. So I know that some of you have been reading the book, The War for Kindness by Jamil Zaki, and I've read most of it myself. So some of what I say will come from that book. But I will also share some material from another book called A Fearless Heart. I borrowed the title from that book. So that is a book by Thupten Jinpa. He's a Tibetan scholar, and he also has a PhD in Western philosophy from Cambridge University. And he was one of the people who founded the compassion training program at Stanford University, which has been going on for quite a few years now. They've been training many people in having more compassion, and also training people to train others to have compassion. So it's a really beautiful book. So empathy, kindness, and compassion are three qualities that are really essential for happiness and peace and well-being. And I figure all of you are interested in these qualities, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But just in case some of you aren't sure how important these qualities are, let's take a few moments to think about that. So I think we have all been on the receiving end of other people's kindness. For example, sometimes we are lost and need help finding our way, or we fall down, we're hurt and we need help, or we're carrying something heavy and need help with that. And in those situations, somebody notices us and takes the time to step forward and help us. Have you had that experience of being helped by others? Yeah. And also as children, you know, we've all been little kids, and babies and children are totally dependent on the kindness of others. Otherwise, we wouldn't survive. Okay, so we've all received a lot of kindness from others. And we've also been on the giving side of kindness. Yeah, we've also been in situations where we saw somebody who needed help, and we stepped forward and helped them. So I think in those situations, whether we're on the receiving end of kindness or the giving end of kindness, it feels good, doesn't it? It's a really nice feeling, kind of like soft and warm in here. Yeah. And it could also help to imagine what the world would be like if there wasn't kindness and compassion. Yeah. So, for example, a natural disaster would happen, a hurricane, a flood, a forest fire, and there'd be all these people who've lost their homes, who've lost loved ones, and they're in really bad shape, and nobody would help them. Yeah, everybody would just carry on with their lives and ignore those people. Or an elderly person would fall down and have difficulty getting up, and everybody would just walk by and not help them. So that wouldn't be very nice. Would you want to live in a world like that, where there was no kindness, no compassion, no empathy? Okay. So I think it is helpful to look at how important kindness is and really appreciate it. So we're very fortunate that these qualities do exist in our world, that people have them. In fact, everybody does have them. According to Buddhism, every person has these qualities, even though for some people they're stronger, for other people they may be weaker, but we all do have, kind of in an innate way, kindness and compassion. We all know how to be that way. But even though we do value kindness and we try to act it out in our lives, sometimes it's hard to be kind. For example, when we're tired, when we're overworked, when we've got too much on our plate and we just feel overwhelmed with our own problems. So at times like that, then it may be hard to care about somebody else and show kindness to another person. So the good news is there are things that we can do to deal with those obstacles, those blockages to our kindness, and learn to grow our kindness and to have more kindness in more situations. So I'm going to share some of those things, and before I do, I would like to define the terms that I'm using so that we're all on the same page. So first of all, let's look at empathy. So there are different opinions, different interpretations about what empathy is. I'm not going to go into all of those, but I'll use the explanation in the book A Fearless Heart by Thupten Jinpa. So he says, empathy is our natural ability to understand others' feelings and share in their experience. It has two key components. One is an emotional response to someone's feelings. So for example, if we see somebody looking sad, we feel sad too. But if we see somebody looking happy, we usually feel, not always, but we usually feel happy too. So we can share in what others are feeling, and that's the emotional side of empathy. And then there's a cognitive side, the cognitive understanding of his or her situation. So that's when we're thinking, oh, I wonder what is going on with that person. Why are they looking that way? Why are they feeling that way? What can I do to help them? So empathy is something that can arise for different emotions, not just for sadness or pain or unhappiness that we see in somebody else, but also joyful feelings. You know, when we see somebody happy, excited, glad, or fearful, or whatever. So it can vary depending on the emotion. And empathy is related to our brain. Back in the 90s, scientists discovered what they call mirror neurons. These are aspects of the brain that enable us to feel what others feel. And studies show that even animals and babies have mirror neurons. So within the first few days after birth, the mirror neurons in a baby's brain prompt them to mimic the facial expressions they see. So you've seen that with babies, right? You smile at the baby and they smile back. That's their mirror neurons working. And then a few months after birth, babies can react to others' pain as if it's happening to them. So if a baby sees another child hurt and crying, then they start to cry as well. So even small babies have this ability to empathize with others. So we all have it. It's a natural part of us. Now let's look at compassion. So again, there's various explanations of what compassion is, and I'll go with the Buddhist explanation, which I know well and is pretty simple. So in Buddhism, compassion is explained as wishing others to not suffer. It's that feeling of wanting another person or other people to not experience suffering, problems. And it arises from empathy. So with empathy, we recognize that somebody is suffering, and then we feel the wish to help them, to do something to help them. And in the book Fearless Heart, Thupten Jinpa says that there are three things that happen when compassion arises in our mind, and they happen almost simultaneously. So the first thing that happens is there's awareness of suffering or need, and that's a cognitive. So just our cognitive part of our brain working and recognizing that person needs help, that person is suffering. And that's actually one aspect of empathy. And then secondly, there's sympathetic concern, which is emotional. And so this is probably where we feel our heart moving, The word for compassion in Sanskrit is karuna, and the meaning of karuna is the quivering of the heart. So in response to someone else's suffering, need, pain, whatever, our heart moves. Okay, we're not just hard and cold and uncaring, but we feel moved. And then the third aspect is wishing the suffering to end, and that's intention. Okay. Now these can happen really, really fast. Like if we see somebody falling down and look, you know, painful expression on their face, within seconds or less, we are probably moving towards them and ready to help in whatever way we can. But all these things are happening in our mind. The recognition that they are suffering and need, concern for them, sympathetic concern, and the wish to help them. And compassion may also lead to action. It's a readiness to help, and this is the motivational side of it. It may not always happen that we step in to help. For one thing, the person that we have compassion for may not be immediately in front of us. Like if we're watching television and we see people on the TV screen who are hungry, or their house has just been knocked down by a cyclone or whatever. So we can't get up and go and help them, even though we wish to. I mean, there's other things we can do. We can send a donation or make a prayer if that's something you're comfortable doing. But at least there's the wish to help. That's the real meaning of compassion. It's the wish to help, the wish to find ways to help. And if it's possible, we do step in to help them. There's some differences between empathy and compassion. For one thing, empathy is simply the awareness. Some people might think that empathy and compassion are the same. Okay, and I'm not going to argue with that because I don't know all the scientific studies. But there does seem to be at least some research that shows that empathy and compassion are different. I mean, for one thing, as I already mentioned, empathy can arise for any emotion, not just suffering. It can arise with joy, whereas compassion is always about somebody's suffering, somebody's unhappiness. Okay, but then I heard about this study that was done. This picture is Mathieu Ricard. He's a Buddhist monk from France. And in an earlier part of his life, he was a biologist. So he's trained in science, and then he met Tibetan lamas and got totally involved in that, and has spent decades studying and practicing a lot of meditation practice. And he's been involved in a number of studies, and sometimes they use an MRI imaging, and sometimes they use, I don't know what this is called, when they have all those things on the head. But anyway, there are people, scientists, who are studying the effects of meditation on the brain. So this one study that was done, conducted by Tanya Singer and her colleagues in Europe, they used MRI imaging, and they were comparing empathy and compassion. And so what they found is that empathy alone, just empathy without compassion, activates areas of the brain that are associated with pain. And this can lead to burnout. So Mathieu, they had asked him to meditate for an hour on empathy, just empathy, inside of an MRI machine, which must have been not easy to do. But anyway, he did it. And he said it was really unbearable. His words are, he was focusing on images of children in Romania who were in an orphanage, and they'd been very badly neglected. And so they were physically, mentally, emotionally in really, really bad shape. So he had just seen a TV program about these children. And so he was thinking about those children and just feeling empathy for them. And he said, entering into resonance with this pain soon became intolerable. In my mind, I did not know how to engage with these children and felt rather powerless. Merely an hour of intense feeling of empathy, dissociated from love and compassion, had led me to burnout. So that was his subjective experience, you know, just having empathy without compassion and love. And the data from that experience, what was happening in his brain, it shows that when someone is experiencing empathy alone, feeling another's pain but without compassion and love, the areas of the brain associated with negative experiences of pain are strongly activated. And then after that hour of meditating on just empathy, he was asked to meditate on compassion. And he said his experience was completely different. He said, the images of the children's suffering were still just as present and strong, but instead of creating in me a feeling of distress and powerlessness that was hard to bear, I now felt a profound, heartwarming courage linked to limitless love for these children. These states of mind fed my courage and reinforced my determination to help others without increasing my distress. So it was clear from my perspective that if there was an empathy fatigue leading to the syndrome of emotional exhaustion, there was no fatigue of love and compassion. And the data from the experiment showed that when he was meditating on compassion, areas of the brain connected with positive emotions were activated. So compassion gives us energy and courage to help those who suffer, as opposed to just empathy without compassion can lead to burnout. So these studies are continuing, and there may be other studies that have other findings, but this is just one research that shows that empathy and compassion are different. Nevertheless, there is a link between love, empathy, and compassion. And so this is also from Mathieu's book, which is called Altruism. What's the full title? Altruism, the Power of Compassion to Change Yourself and the World. And so he says there's a link between these three qualities: love, empathy, and compassion. So in Buddhism, Buddhist practitioners learn meditations in which we cultivate both compassion and love in meditation. The way we cultivate compassion is by thinking about those who are experiencing suffering and generate this feeling of wishing them to be free of suffering and wishing to do what we can to help them be free. And we end up with this determination to do whatever we can to relieve the suffering of others. And Mathieu says this process of training in compassion leads to an increased readiness and desire to act for the good of others. And the training in compassion goes hand in hand with training in altruistic love. So we also cultivate love, and in Buddhism, love is explained as the wish for others to be happy. So love and compassion are very similar. They're kind of like two sides of a coin or two sides of a hand. They're focused on others and caring about others. Love is wanting them to be happy. Compassion is wanting them to not suffer. So it'd be hard to have one without the other. They really, influence each other. And so Mathieu has been training for years and years in those meditations and knows them very well. And so he says that when altruistic love, when you have this love for others, we try to cultivate love for everybody and not just for a limited number of people like my family and my friends, but gradually extending it to more and more people until we can feel it for everybody. So training in that, learning that, practicing that, So you have that attitude of love, and then when it encounters suffering, it manifests as compassion. And this transformation is triggered by empathy. So empathy, that ability to connect with, to feel the suffering of others, alerts us to the fact that the others are suffering. So he says, we could say that when altruistic love passes through the prism of empathy, it becomes compassion. So the point here is that if we learn to have genuine love and compassion for others, wishing them to be happy, wishing them to be free of suffering, then, and that is part of our attitude in dealing with others and working with others, we're less likely to get exhausted and burned out when we are helping others. Whereas empathy alone, without these qualities of love and compassion, can lead to burnout. Okay, so one important question is, can we cultivate more love, more compassion, and more empathy? And so in the book, The War for Kindness by Jamil Zaki, he talks about two kinds of people, fixists and mobilists. I'm not sure if he got those terms from somewhere else or he made them up. But anyway, fixists are people who think they can't change, who think, I am the way I am, I was born this way, and I just have to be this way. I can't change, I can't improve. And some people do believe that. And then there are mobilists who believe that it is possible to change. I can change myself. So with regard to a trait like empathy, compassion, and so on, a fixist might think, oh, well, lots of people have lots of empathy and compassion, but I don't. So this is just the way I am. I can't change. And they don't even try. They don't even put effort into changing themselves. Whereas mobilists would think, I can change, I can work on this. So Jamil said that one of his colleagues at Stanford, another psychologist named Carol Dweck, has done studies and written books on how believing that it's possible to change helps to make it so. And there's lots of other studies that have shown that our brains and our minds can and do change. So these are just a few quotes from the book. We're not static or frozen. Our brains and our minds shift throughout our lives. So even without trying to change, we do change. It happens. It's just natural. And from the Buddhist point of view, this is completely understandable because Buddhism talks about impermanence, meaning our bodies, our minds, and the things in the world around us are constantly going through change. Nothing is fixed, nothing is static, nothing is frozen. Things are always changing all the time. And then he says, we now have decades of evidence demonstrating that empathy is shaped by experience. So for example, one study showed that little children whose parents were empathic, who showed high levels of empathy, these little children would also show concern for strangers and were more able to tune into others' emotions and would act more generously when compared with other children of the same age. So if we're with people, especially parents and other adults and friends and so on, if those people have empathy and show empathy, then we're more likely to be empathic ourselves. The same with any qualities. If we also spend time with people who are angry and violent, then we may be influenced by those qualities and become more like that ourselves. So we're very easily influenced by others. And finally, he says, simply believing it is possible to change one's empathy helps to make it so. And they did a study, I guess at Stanford. They had two groups of students, and one group of students read an article describing a person who had changed over time. Like earlier in her life, she wasn't very empathic, but later she became very caring and helping a lot of people. And the other group of people read an article which was kind of similar, but it depicted empathy as a fixed trait. Somebody who was not empathic at one point in time and even years later was still the same. And so they found that these two groups of students reading those articles, they believed the messages that were expressed, and that affected their choices. Yeah. So the mobilist, who believed that it was possible to change, became more empathic, whereas the fixist, who didn't think it was possible to change, weren't so empathic. So it does show that it is important for us to believe in our potential for change, because if we believe that we can change, that will affect the choices that we make and where we put our energy. And I'm 100% convinced that it's possible to change, because it's happened to me. I mean, a big part of it is Buddhism, learning meditation, because Buddhism is really about the mind. It's about how to work on the mind and change the mind for the better, how to decrease anger and selfishness and greed and these aspects of the mind that are problematic and disturbing, and how to increase positive aspects of the mind like love and compassion. So I can see a huge change in myself working on these methods over the years. But even before I met Buddhism, I had this experience growing up. When I was a teenager, I had to share a room with my sister because we didn't have enough rooms in the house for all the kids. So I didn't mind when I was younger. I was quite happy to share a room with her. But when I became a teenager, some of my friends had their own rooms, and I really wanted to have my own room too. So I really resented the fact that my sister was there. And I was sometimes really mean to her. I feel quite ashamed of what I used to do. But at some point when I think I was about 16, and I don't know why, what happened, but I just decided I wasn't going to do that anymore, and I was going to be nice to her. And I just decided I'm going to love my sister, and I was able to do it. Yeah. So just by making a decision to be a certain way, you might need a little help from other people or from self-help books and so on, but making a decision to be a certain way, you can do it. Okay, so it is definitely possible to change, and it's important to believe in that. Otherwise, yeah, we won't even try to change. So it is possible to change, and I'm going to share some methods for how we can change and increase our compassion and our kindness. So one thing that is helpful is to understand the benefits that we will experience by having more kindness and compassion. So these are some of the benefits from Thupten Jinpa's book, A Fearless Heart, and they're all supported by research, but we can try them out ourselves and see in our own experience if they are true. So one benefit is what they call the helper's high. Okay, so you probably experienced that when you help people, even just helping one person or getting involved in, a community project, volunteering. It feels good. Yeah, you feel good. It's recommended for people suffering from depression. Get out and help people, do things, and you'll feel better. And there's a physiological basis for that, which you've probably heard of. They say there's more endorphins in our system when we are involved in helping and volunteering. So those are the happy hormones. So we naturally feel happier. And a second benefit is having a greater sense of purpose in life. Sometimes people get kind of depressed and they feel, what's the point of it all? And they just don't see any meaning or purpose to life, or they may feel personally hopeless and unable to do anything. So if you cultivate more compassion and kindness, you're opening your heart and your mind to others, and you're looking for ways that you can help others, and you will find them. There's plenty of opportunities to help others, and that will make you feel useful, less depressed, less useless. And so you feel that your life does have purpose and meaning rather than being meaningless. And another benefit is less stress. So stress can arise from being overly concerned about me and my problems. Does that sound familiar? I think we all have that tendency. So when we have a problem, we tend to focus on our problem and worry about it and maybe think, oh, maybe this is going to be there forever, it's never going to go away, and just feel really unhappy and miserable and sorry for ourselves and so on. So we spend a lot of mental energy thinking about and worrying about our own problems, and that naturally leads to stress. Yeah, that's not a recipe for happiness. So on the other hand, when we learn to be more concerned for others and look for ways to help others and get involved in helping others, then we're less focused on ourselves and our problems. And so we'll feel better, we'll feel happier. And also, one benefit of this is we recognize the problems that others have. Our own problems might seem much smaller in comparison. Instead of seeming like a mountain, they'll seem more like a molehill. And then we're better able to manage them. We feel like, oh, this problem isn't so bad and I can manage it. So it helps us to deal better with our own problems, and we'll have less stress due to that. Another benefit is being less lonely and more connected with others. So loneliness is a huge problem these days. Many people suffer from loneliness. They just stay by themselves. They don't have anyone they can talk to, anyone they can spend time with. And that also has an adverse effect on health and on your lifespan. So if we cultivate compassion and kindness, look for ways to help others, to be with others, to connect with others, then we'll be free of that suffering of loneliness. And people will like us too. In the traditional Buddhist teachings, there's also lists of the benefits of having more love, more compassion. And one of those is people will like you. And if you think about it, what kind of people do you like? Yeah, what kind of people are you attracted to? Is it people who are kind of morose and depressed and bad-tempered and grouchy and uncaring? Or are you more attracted to people who are kind and generous and friendly and caring and make you feel good? So if we can become more like that ourselves, then yeah, people will be attracted to us and we'll find we have lots of friends. So another benefit is that kindness is contagious. So research shows that when someone does an act of kindness, other people who observe it or hear about it are inspired to also do an act of kindness. So that means one act of kindness can inspire maybe 10 others, and then those 10 may inspire another 10. So it's like a ripple effect. More and more people doing acts of kindness, more and more people benefiting from those. So in short, we'll be happier and healthier if we can have more compassion and kindness. And I mean, the real purpose of having compassion and kindness is to help others, but it's good to know that we will benefit from it as well. Yeah, that might make us more motivated to be kind. So it helps everybody. It helps others, but it also helps ourselves. Okay, so then here are some things we can do to increase empathy, to have more empathy, which is needed to be able to have compassion and kindness. We have to be able to notice and be aware of the feelings of others. So Yeah, some of these are from the book by Jamil Zaki, The War for Kindness. So reading and listening to stories of people's problems and putting yourself in their shoes. So it takes some energy to do this. Yeah, you have to be motivated to do it. But just paying more attention through reading, through listening to people's experiences, other people's experiences, and in a caring way, like, you know, really trying to put yourself in the shoes of that other person and understand what they are going through, what they're experiencing. So that's one way of opening up our hearts more and having more empathy. Another way is to get to know people outside of our group. So we tend to stay within a group of people, family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, who have similar likes and dislikes and views and lifestyles and so on. And that can be quite comfortable. But then with regard to people who are outside of our group, yeah, and have different views, different lifestyle, we may be somewhat closed to them. And that can lead to maybe ideas. You know, our mind may make up stories, fantasies about those people, which are completely not true, yeah? But we don't know that because we haven't actually talked to them. And so, you know, our mind can get caught up in these stories and these beliefs, and then that can lead to fear, suspicion, aversion, and, you know, further distancing ourselves from others. And that's not helpful for anybody. So it's much more helpful if we take the time to understand others, get to know them, and yeah, we'll probably find that we have more in common than we thought. I read about this one man, I don't remember his name. He was a musician, a black musician, and he claims that he converted, I don't know if that's the right word, a large number of KKK followers. And the first one was, he was playing in a bar, playing music, and this man came up to him and, you know, thanked him for the music and really liked the music that he was playing. And they started talking and had a drink together. And then this man, it turns out, was a member of the KKK, and he had never in his life talked to a black man. You know, that was the first time in his life he ever sat down and actually talked to a black man. And so this man, the black musician, you know, they became friends and they talked quite openly. And eventually, this KKK follower, you know, gave up his membership to KKK, gave up his robes. And he's done this with many others as well. And so the point there is that, you know, this person who was in the KKK, you know, really didn't understand the other group that he was so opposed to. He had ideas about them, but they were not correct, not true. And this gave him an opportunity to explore something he had never explored before. And he realized, well, we're human beings. We're all human beings. We do have differences, but there are ways in which we are the same. And that's actually the next point, too. We tend to focus more on the differences between ourselves and others, which do exist. Each person is completely unique. No two people are the same. So those differences definitely exist. But if we focus too much on the differences between us, then that leads to a feeling of disconnect and separation and distance from others. And so if we make an effort to focus on ways in which we are the same rather than different. I heard a saying once, all our tears are salty and all our blood is red. And that really struck me. I thought, yeah, it's true. Yeah, we're human beings. We have this kind of body. And, we cry when we're in pain, when we're sad, when we're grieving, and our tears are salty. And when we have some injury and our blood flows, it's red. And so there's a lot more we have in common, similarities with other people, than there are differences. And reflecting on those, focusing on those, keeping those in mind is one way to feel closer to others and have more empathy to others. And the next point here is to reflect on your favorite version of the golden rule. So it seems that the majority of religions and spiritual traditions and cultures in the world have some version of the golden rule, which is basically about understanding that other people are basically the same as ourselves. They want to be treated well, and they don't want to be treated badly. So this is phrased in different ways, and in Buddhism, in particular in Tibetan Buddhism, we actually do a meditation where we contemplate words like what's here: everyone wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, just like me. And it's like very simple and seemingly obvious, but it may be something we don't normally think about. And if we do think about that, and it's good to do it like one person at a time, rather than a whole group of people. Just think of one person and think, yeah, we're different, yes, but there's a lot we have in common, like this very basic fact that we want to be happy. This person wants to be happy just like I want to be happy. I want to have good experiences. I want people to treat me well. So does this person, just like me. And the opposite side of that is I don't want to suffer. I don't want people to be mean to me, to hurt me. I don't want bad things to happen to me. The same is true for that person too. Yeah. So it really has quite a profound effect on the mind to contemplate this. And I've found myself doing it sometimes, like when I'm traveling, maybe on a bus or a train, and it's particularly helpful with people you see who really look different. You know, their way of dress, mannerisms, and way of talking and so on are really quite different, and I sometimes feel a little uncomfortable. But if I contemplate this is just another human being like me, they have a body like mine, they have thoughts and feelings like mine. Basically, they're just trying to be happy. They want to be happy. They want food and clothes and shelter and people to treat them nicely. And they don't want suffering or pain. They don't want people treating them badly. So just spending a couple of moments thinking about that really helps me to feel comfortable. You know, takes away that feeling of separation and discomfort. And so that's a very helpful way of increasing empathy as well. And then being a volunteer. Like a lot of the methods for developing empathy, compassion, and so on require doing some reflection, thinking, meditating. Some people find that difficult. Thupten Jinpa mentions that in his book when they were doing the compassion training program. A lot of the practices involved meditation, but some people weren't comfortable meditating. They were too restless, they had too much energy. So they devised methods where people could just go out and do things, act out compassion, practice compassion in action. So one way of doing that is to be a volunteer. There's always places, wherever we are, that need that kind of help. So that's a good way of connecting with people and learning to be more empathic. Okay, now let's look at how to increase compassion. And I thought that maybe here we could pause and do a little bit of meditation to get a taste of this. So a simple way of increasing compassion is to bring to mind a person. And it's best to start with someone you already care about. someone you feel it's easy for you to care and feel compassion. So it could be a child or a pet, a sibling, a parent, a friend, anyone. And you could choose someone who is already at this time experiencing some difficulty, physical or mental, or you could just imagine this person looking unhappy, going through some kind of difficulty. So do that in your mind, and then allow empathy to arise. So empathy should just arise naturally in your mind, this feeling of closeness, of connectedness with the other person, understanding how they're feeling. And then that may lead to compassion automatically, wishing this person to not suffer, wishing this person to be happy. And if it doesn't, then you could prompt your mind to feel it by just saying something to yourself. And it could be words like this, or you could use your own words. May they be happy and may they be free of suffering. And then I put, because there may be some emotional agitation there in the mind, and sometimes if we get too emotional when we are concerned about somebody else, it makes it a little harder to think clearly about what to do. What would be the most effective way of helping this person? And so it's good to, breathe deeply to calm down our mind, and then that can make the mind more clear and able to think about what can I do that would be helpful for this person. And then if it's appropriate, you can do it. So let's do a little meditation on this. I think we have enough time. So I invite you to make yourself comfortable. It's good if you can keep your back straight. That helps the mind to be more clear and focused. And let your mind settle down in the here and now, just in case you're thinking about something else that's not related to what we're doing here right now. You might be thinking about something that happened earlier today or your plans for tomorrow. So bring your mind back to the present, right here in this room, right now in this moment. Being aware of the breath is a helpful way of doing that, because our breathing is right here, right now. Just be aware of the gentle rhythm of your breathing coming in and going out. Now think of someone you would like to feel compassion for, someone you know, someone you care about. It could be someone who is going through some difficulty right now, physically, or mentally, emotionally, or all three. Or it could just be a friend who sometimes has difficulties. So try to have a mental picture of that person as if they're right in front of you right now. And it can be helpful to imagine them looking unhappy or distressed or in pain. And that should bring up empathy, resonating with what they're feeling. And because you care about this person, it will probably also bring up compassion, concern, your heart moved, wanting them to not suffer, wanting to help them to not suffer. And if that doesn't happen, if you don't feel compassion, it can help to say to yourself something like, may this person be happy and free from their suffering. And if you notice your mind getting overly upset or distressed, then it can help to again focus on the breathing. Maybe take a deep breath, exhale slowly. Then imagine things you could do that would be helpful to the person. Even to just reach out and ask them how they're doing. Give them time and space to talk to you. And giving them your willingness to listen and care. So you might conclude this meditation by making a determination that next time you see one of your loved ones in need, that you will allow yourself to feel empathy and compassion and give them what will be beneficial for them. So one notion people sometimes have about compassion is that it means that if you have compassion for someone, you need to suffer with them. And I encountered this notion when I was living in Europe, because the word for compassion is pretty much the same in many languages, French and Spanish and Italian and so on. And etymologically, it does have that sense of suffering with. Compassion means suffering with. And so some people think that if you have compassion for someone who's suffering, you have to suffer too. And they actually felt, apparently there's some reluctance to have compassion for that reason, because, oh, I got enough suffering as it is, I don't need more. So that's an interesting idea. And I don't think it is necessarily the case. I mean, with the empathy, with empathy, you do feel some degree of unhappiness or sadness. But if you let yourself kind of drown in suffering equal to the person that you're feeling compassion for, then that would inhibit your ability to help them. Yeah? So I think it's enough to be aware that they're suffering, but you also need to have some objectivity and some ability to be able to keep your mind clear so that you can think about what will be most helpful and do what will be most helpful. So, for example, some of you are probably parents, and if you have a small child who is crying either because they hurt themselves or they're upset about something and they're really crying, and you care about them, but if you start crying too, if you let yourself dissolve in tears and fall apart like them, I mean, is that going to be helpful for your child? Right? So you care about them, you feel their suffering, but you need to keep your own mind kind of above that so that you can give them comfort and say soothing words and do whatever is needed that will help them get out of that state. Yeah? So, yeah. And I think nurses, at least some nurses that I've met, seem to have that quality very well. You know, they're really caring and loving, and they do understand that you're in a difficult situation, but they are able to remain cheerful and efficient and do their work. So if you've met people who have that kind of quality, that kind of ability, I think that's a good illustration of the ideal way of being compassionate and helping in a compassionate way. Okay, I've just got one more slide. I'll go through that. It's about resilience because, as I mentioned at the beginning, sometimes it can be hard to have compassion and empathy and kindness if we already feel overwhelmed by our own problems and or we're tired or whatever. And dealing with people's problems can be difficult. It can be emotionally exhausting. We feel what they're feeling, and after a while we may have to get a space from that. So resilience is the ability to bounce back after adversity. And so when you go through some problems and difficulty, being able to get yourself back on your feet and back into a state of mind where you're able to go on. You're not kind of drowning in sorrow and despair and so on. So we do need this quality when it comes to helping others. And there are many of these are from the Buddha's teachings, so they could be helpful for you, helpful ways of thinking, reflecting that can help us avoid despair and burnout and keep up our energy to continue helping others. So one is to understand that suffering and problems are part of life, but they are not eternal. Okay, so it's simply the situation of our world and us beings in this world that everybody goes through problems and difficulties. Nobody's able to go through life and never face problems. So just accepting that problems and difficulties are a natural part of life, but they don't last forever. And that's helpful to remind ourselves of, because I can see this in myself. When a problem comes along, there's some part of my mind that says, oh, it's going to be there forever. It's never going to go away. And it's not true. There's no problem that's going to be there forever. It may last a few minutes or hours or days or maybe years, but eventually it does go away. It does change. And this is, again, what the Buddha spoke of as impermanence, the impermanent changing nature of things. And so that's true with problems and difficulties. They're not going to last forever. And I find that reminding myself of that really gives a sense of lightness rather than heaviness to the whole thing. And another thing that I think is helpful is to know that when people go through problems and difficulties, they can learn things and grow. I know a few people I know, and I've also heard stories of people who say they went through something like cancer. And one person I know who said that, he said, it was the best experience of my life. He learned so much from that. He grew so much from that. And so that's helpful to keep in mind as well, that problems aren't necessarily totally 100% bad, but there can be positive outcomes from going through problems and difficulties. So that can help us to be not so stressed and upset when someone is going through a difficulty. And then be practical, do what you can to help, but accept your limitations. So when someone is in need and we're trying to help them, it doesn't help to have this expectation that I'm going to solve this problem and make everything okay and the person won't have any more suffering. I mean, that's not realistic. We can try, and we may be successful in making the problem go away, but we may not. And so it's important to accept that, yeah, we can't totally eliminate every single problem, every suffering. I had to learn this through several experiences. One was one of my brothers who's had a lifelong problem with addiction that's caused so many problems in his life. And I would sometimes get really upset, really distressed, worried. I really wanted to help him. But at some point I realized all I can do is try, but it's really up to him to get himself out of that situation. And so that helped me to just relax, go on loving him, doing what I can to help, praying for him, but stop expecting that I'm going to be able to solve his problem for him. So that's an important insight to gain. Help, do what we can, but also accept that we may not be able to make it all go away. And then we need to take care of ourselves when we're helping others. If we overextend ourselves, spend too much energy, then we may get burned out, and we need other people to help us. So it's important to be in touch with ourselves, our needs, our physical energy, our mental energy. And if we find ourselves approaching burnout, take a break, ask for help, do things to take care of yourself, your needs. Have compassion for yourself. And finally, meditation. So meditation can be very helpful to deal with whatever difficulties you're going through as you're helping others. Probably the most common, popular form of meditation is mindfulness, where you watch what's happening in your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, not getting caught up in them, but seeing that they come and go like clouds in the sky. So that helps you to be in touch with what's happening in your mind, but in a somewhat objective way, so that you're not totally overwhelmed by. And that is really, really helpful. I once met a man who worked as a fireman, and he said that's a really stressful job because they're often the first people to arrive on the scene of some horrific tragedy, like an accident or a fire or a suicide. And so they're seeing really heavy suffering, and it can be very traumatic. And he found that regular practice of meditation really helped him deal with the stress of that job. Whereas he says many of his colleagues who didn't meditate, they would just drink. But then that leads to other problems. So yeah, it's a more healthy way of dealing with stress and trauma. Okay, so I've shared quite a lot of material, and maybe it's been overwhelming, but I'll stop there. And I do thank you for coming and giving me this chance to talk. And we do have some time left if anybody would like to ask a question.
What advice would you have for someone who feels as if they've hit like a brick wall with their spirituality and their meditation?
Hit a brick wall, you mean no more energy to continue, or you don't know where to go, or? So you've already explored some options, but now you're not sure where to go next. Yeah. Pray. Yeah, just call on the forces of goodness and wisdom and compassion, and ask for help and guidance. And I mean, sometimes it doesn't help to push, sometimes we push ourselves when we feel I should do more, I should do this, and that isn't helpful. Sometimes it's good to just, take a break, go into the mountains, go into nature, get in touch with nature, and also get in touch with yourself and give yourself time. Maybe it's not a question of I have to do it now or this year, but maybe I just need more time, more space to figure out what my next steps are. Because nobody can tell you that. There's people who try, come to this one, come to that one, see this teacher. But it's something you need to come to yourself. And maybe it could also be helpful to think about what kind of qualities do I really want to develop in myself? Yeah, what kind of person do I want to be? And that might help you then to know which direction to go, which tradition or teacher to explore. So your question is, how can Buddhism help with more empathy and more compassion? Well, I think probably every religion and spiritual tradition, and even secular traditions of meditation, can be used to help us open up our hearts and have more love and compassion and kindness. So I don't think Buddhism has an exclusive hold on that. But I think it's just that the particular teachings and practices in Buddhism appeal to some people, and others would not find those interesting, and they would be more attracted to another spiritual tradition. So I think it's more a question of which spiritual tradition or secular tradition feels right for you and can help you to open your heart. I don't know, when I was very young, I just felt really strongly attracted to Buddhism, and I even traveled to the other side of the world to meet the Dalai Lama. So I just had that strong, it's almost like a magnetic draw. And then when I did start learning Buddhism, I found so many beautiful teachings, and I really liked too that the Buddha said, don't believe what I say, check it out for yourself. That we have the freedom to think about and question and check for ourselves before believing things, because not many religious traditions have that kind of view. That was one thing that attracted me. So I think, yeah, each person, we all have our own needs and wishes and personality and disposition. So, we find a tradition that fits best for us. And it's also, like many of my teachers have said, you can take teachings and practices from Buddhism without becoming a Buddhist. You don't have to take on the whole thing, but you can, Buddhism has a really nice method for developing compassion. I want to use that. And you can still be following some other religion. I mean, I've heard of Catholic nuns and priests who do Buddhist meditation. They don't convert to Buddhism, but they find that practice of meditation very helpful for their own spiritual practice. So that's completely fine.
For those people who experience a great amount of empathy and compassion but feel this almost like they can't do enough, like what's your recommendation for self-compassion in the process of helping relieving the suffering of others?
So if in the case of someone who it's almost like a compulsion, an obsession to help others, well, I don't know. I mean, everyone has their own abilities, and there may be people who are able to just keep doing and giving and caring, and they don't suffer from that. But on the other hand, if someone is, I don't know if it's really possible to do it too much, if they get burned out themselves, they're not taking care of themselves. I mean, nothing comes to mind.
Or like the weight of, like,
there's so many things in the world to heal. There's so much suffering to be relieved and feeling like, oh, I could never do enough.
Oh,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That type of.
Well, that's like what I was saying here, this notion of doing what we can to help, but also accepting our limitations. Yeah, so it is important to have compassion and love and try and, you know, help others as much as we can, but we also have to accept we can only do so much. I'm just one person, I just have this one body and these two hands, and, you know, I can only do so much. I can't take care of all of it. So accepting that, and I mean, in Buddhism, we do have this notion of developing ourselves further and, you know, and gaining higher states of being where we can do more, we can help more. And so that's part of our practice too, is cultivating that aspiration to develop ourselves further and even become Buddhas, enlightened beings like the Buddha, and along the way gaining more ability to help others, you know, getting beyond our present limitations and getting more ability. So there's, I guess that helps avoid the problem of hopelessness, like, oh, you know, I can only do this much and I will be like this forever. So we do see that possibility of developing ourselves further and doing more. And it's important to keep your mind positive and happy. For me, the Dalai Lama is such a perfect example. You know, he has this amazing compassion and energy, and, you know, is helping people and doing things that benefit others. But he's, you know, relaxed and joyful and makes jokes, and so being able to keep that balance of helping but not being, you know, overwhelmed by it and then depressed and in despair and, oh, I can't do it. So that's why it's important to be in touch with ourselves and take care of ourselves and our needs. Is that it? Does that answer?
Yeah, and you just made me think of how it's just another form of attachment.
Could be. Yeah, yeah.
How would you recommend someone who's interested in starting like meditation and mindfulness for the first time? How would you advise they go about doing that, and what tips do you have for like being consistent and getting the most out of it?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything available locally, like here. No meditation teachers or courses or classes. Well, no, we don't really have just meditation courses, do we? Just for
Young
meditation.
adults explore Buddhism would be a good idea, but young adults explore Buddhism would be helpful.
Young adults exploring Buddhism. Yeah. Yeah, we do have a program. When is it? June?
14 to 20.
Yeah. We have a program where people, young people, can come to the Abbey and stay. Is it a week?
Yeah, 6 days.
Yeah, it's a week, and you learn meditation, and you're with other young people, and you have a chance to discuss things, and so that's what we have to offer. And we do have online courses. Yeah, I mean, it is nice if you can learn directly from a teacher rather than from books, from apps, you know, because if you have questions or problems, you know, you need someone you can ask help for. Yeah. I'm thinking, you know, in large cities, there's so many places where people can learn meditation. And what's that called? Mindfulness-based stress reduction? Does that exist here? That's usually pretty common. Mindfulness, what is it called? MB.
MBSR.
MBSR. It's a book, but yeah, it's to complement live teachings. Yeah, so I have met people who learned meditation on their own, and they did quite well for a while. I mean, eventually it's good to find a teacher or multiple teachers to help and guide you, but some people are able to at least start practicing on their own. I really needed a group situation with teachers. My mind was just too wild to be able to do it on my own.